Okay, so we're diving in today.
Yeah.
And this time, it's, it's personal,
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got this Vietnam flashback
Huh.
written just this year, January 2025. But it takes us way back,
Back to when?
1969, right in the thick of it.
Vietnam.
Right, with a veteran trying to come back home. Back to the world, as he calls it.
Interesting. The world, huh? Setting it apart already.
Exactly. And that's what grabbed me, like right off the bat, this tension between, the pull of going back to what he knew, what was dangerous but familiar, the jungle, versus this home front that's anything but stable. What hits you first when you read this?
It's the alienation, honestly. Like it just jumps out. This guy, he's back and he's surrounded by, well, protests, people who don't get it. It's like he's a stranger in his own country. And that's something that, well, it's not just Vietnam, is it?
Right, right. This feeling, it's almost like a universal veteran experience, isn't it? This disconnect.
It is. And it's powerful, It really underscores how any war, it changes you, your identity, your sense of belonging, everything's shaken up.
And he hammers that home with the language he uses, right?
Oh, absolutely. The jungle, the world.
It's like these two separate planets, not just places, but whole states of being.
Exactly. It really highlights that psychological gap
Yeah.
between those who've seen combat and those who haven't. And it's not an easy gap to bridge, is it?
No, no, it isn't. And then there's this moment where he almost re-enlists.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, can you imagine? He's surrounded by protests, can't connect with anyone, and part of him just wants to go back to Vietnam. Why?
I mean, it's complex, right?
Yeah.
There's this familiarity in the structure, the purpose, even the danger of military life, especially when civilian life feels, well, chaotic and strange. It's like a twisted kind of comfort zone. Plus, there's this thing called moral injury.
Moral injury.
Yeah, it's this internal conflict when what you've done, what you've seen, it clashes with your own morals. And war, it forces you into those situations. So coming home, trying to process that, especially when no one around you understands, it's rough.
And then there's this scene with his wife. He's about to tell her he's going back, then he stops, waiting for the right moment. They're watching Three's Company. And it's such a normal thing in the middle of this massive internal crisis.
Human, right?
Totally. But then she gives him this ultimatum: I will not wait for you again. And it just hits you the cost of war. It's not just on the soldier. It ripples out.
Absolutely. Families, loved ones, everyone gets pulled into it. And they sacrifice, too.
In 1969, we can't forget that, right? Anti-war movement in full swing. Deep
Yeah,
divisions in society. It's all happening around him.
exactly. His own struggle, trying to make sense of it all, it mirrors what's happening in the country. And it makes his decision to stay, well, even more loaded.
You can just feel the weight of it. Even though he stays, it's like he's still carrying the scars, not just physical ones.
Oh, absolutely. And then there are these letters from his old platoon. They're complaining about their new lieutenant, totally green.
Yeah.
And it just drives home the reality. These guys were in constant danger. Leadership, experience, it was everything.
It's weird though, right? He finds peace in the jungle, the literal jungle of Vietnam, but back home in the world.
Well, that's the thing about PTSD. Sometimes that structure, that purpose, even the danger, it becomes familiar. It's a coping mechanism, twisted but real.
So we've got this personal story, specific time, specific place, but it raises these huge questions, doesn't it? Questions that, well, they go beyond Vietnam, beyond any one war.
Definitely. It makes you think about the homecoming story and what's hidden beneath it. What battles are still being fought long after someone leaves the battlefield? How do we bridge that gap between the jungle and the world? How do we understand? How do we support? Big questions that I hope our listeners, they keep thinking about.
Absolutely. Thanks for diving into this one with me. It's definitely stayed with me.
Me too.